Guys, today a video about what are the best early constellations to get in Genshin Impact. By early constellations, I mean Constellation 1 and 2, which I think are pretty relatable stopping points. For this video's tier list, I'm separating the Constellation 1 and 2s, because some characters have broken Constellation 1s, but not so good Constellation 2s, and vice versa. So I don't think merging the two is very useful for the purpose of showing the value of each constellation. Also, this video is more about how much of an upgrade each constellation is for each specific character, rather than who is the best character at Constellation 1 or 2. And so here you will find out how much better your favorite characters can get by investing on them constellations wise. Obviously I did research and calculations for everything in this video, but I want to show every single infographic because I don't want the video to become too heavy. So for some things you'll have to take my word for it. So let's start. Alhaitham. Constellation 1, he reduces his elemental skill cooldown for every projection attack during his rotation. He usually doesn't need it if you do rotations right. It's more like a quality of life thing on most teams. On some teams it can come in handy, but definitely not something that is always useful. So I would just put it in okay-ish. His Constellation 2 is another story because it increases his elemental mastery during his rotations by quite a bit, and so it increases his damage output by a decent amount. So, decent upgrade. Albedo, both the Constellation 1 and Constellation 2 make the burst better. The Constellation 1 makes him recover energy, the Constellation 2 makes the burst deal more damage. You don't want to use the burst on teams with Albedo, so just don't. Arlecchino, I like her constellations a lot. The Constellation 1 increases her damage by quite a bit and also gives her interruption resistance, which on teams that don't have a shielder like Citlali is very useful. So I think it's a strong upgrade. The Constellation 2 makes her deal a lot of damage at the start of her rotations because it makes her deal a big hit when she claims her mark on opponents, so when she starts attacking. And it feels very nice because Arlecchino lacks a nuke at the start of the rotation. She can't use a burst like that. So the Constellation 2 replaces that element for her, but it's just a strong upgrade in my opinion. It's not a transformative one. Ayaka, her Constellation 1 reduces the cooldown of her elemental skill when she attacks. It's not a big deal. It's nice to smoothen out some rotations, but it's not really a big deal, so don't. Her Constellation 2 is a funny one because it makes her create some extra elemental bursts on the side of the main one that are smaller and deal less damage, and since they're smaller, sometimes they won't hit anybody, so that's funny. But when they do, they translate to a lot more damage per rotation for her, and in specific situations like against bosses, so enemies that have big hitboxes, all the bursts can hit the same opponent, and that's very beneficial. I think it's a decent upgrade overall. Baizhu, the Constellation 1 gives an extra charge to his elemental skill, really not needed in my opinion, so don't. The Constellation 2 is funny because it makes him deal a Dendro attack when the active character deals an attack, even without using any ability of his. So it's interesting because it can apply Dendro without going on field and using time in the rotation. So it's situationally useful. I've seen it in some Nouvellette speedruns in the past. I don't really know now because Baizhu's use cases for characters like Nouvellette have fallen off a bit, but overall I think it's an okay-ish upgrade for him. Chasca, her Constellation 1 makes her deal an extra elemental shot regardless of everything when she uses her charge attacks, and also gives her a bigger percentage to deal the third elemental shot if you don't have a full team of 3 elements out of Electro, Pyro, Cryo, and Hydro. So it makes her better on teams like Bennett, Mavuika, Citlali, those kinds of teams. Overall, regardless, it's a strong upgrade because the extra elemental shot it adds regardless, it's a lot more damage. The Constellation 2 is a similar structure because it lessens her team building requirements because she has a passive that gives her a damage bonus if she has those 3 elements of team out of those 4 that I just mentioned, but with the Constellation 2 she gains an extra stack of that by default, so it makes her less restrictive and also makes her deal more damage per rotation as a baseline, so it's pretty good. Childe, the Constellation 1 decreases his elemental skill cooldown by 20%. It's not needed if you use perfect rotations with him, but it's nice quality of life because cooldowns are the biggest caveat he has. Constellation 2 makes him recover energy when enemies with Riptide are defeated. Pretty situational, pretty useless, just don't. Before I move on, let me remind you that if you enjoy my channel but you haven't subbed yet, please consider doing so because it really makes me notice your support. Citlali, Constellation 1 is nice. It makes the active character deal additional damage based on her elemental mastery, and it works like quills, so like Shenhe. Characters like Arlecchino that deal a lot of hits per rotation can make use of this better than characters like Mavuika that deal not so many hits per rotation, so I think it's a decent upgrade overall. The Constellation 2 is broken. It makes her give the active character more elemental mastery, it increases the resistance reduction to Hydro and Pyro she provides by 20%, it's just very strong. It's a very strong supportive Constellation that makes her team much better. So to me, it's a game-changing upgrade because it's a very strong supportive Constellation. Clorinde, the Constellation 1 makes her deal more damage, quite a bit actually, like 18-19% I think more. So I don't know if decent or strong, probably decent because it's just a straightforward damage increase for her rotations, but nothing insane. The Constellation 2 is just like that also, but it also gives her interruption resistance, which for her is very important because on most of her teams, actually most of her best teams, she doesn't have a shield there, so it comes in handy, really. I know its Constellation 1 is sometimes useful, sometimes not. It increases the normal attack speed, but that's only really useful on some specific rotations for its teams. Like, I would say it's okay-ish overall, but not really a consistent damage increase. Constellation 2 is interesting to me because it increases its damage bonus by a lot, but Cyno on many of his best teams is played on Hype Bloom setups, Quick Bloom setups, and that Hype Bloom damage that he will trigger is not affected by damage bonus, so it would have made more sense design-wise to give him some elemental mastery on this Constellation also, but it's Cyno. A lot of him doesn't make sense. The developers just kind of failed him in my opinion. Escoffier, Constellation 1 makes her give cryo characters on the team a 60% crit damage increase, which is great, but only very good on teams that have a cryo main DPS, like Skirk, Ayaka. On teams like Nilou is really not that big of a deal, so to me it's just a strong upgrade. The Constellation 2 is kind of similar to Citlali's Constellation 1 because it makes her give the active character quills that can only be triggered by cryo damage again, so not hydro damage, which is a shame, but overall it's really not that big of a damage increase, so who cares. Decent upgrade, I would say. Eula, the Constellation 1 makes her deal more damage, but not a lot more, so decent upgrade. The Constellation 2 changes some of her elemental skill cooldowns, so specifically the hold version elemental skill cooldowns, but it's not a big deal for her rotation, so don't. Furina. The Constellation 1 gives her burst 150 fanfare right away without requiring healing on cast, so it translates to a lot of damage bonus right away for the whole team, which is about a 10 to 11% damage increase on teams that can fully take advantage of damage bonus, so that's pretty nice, because it also increases the limit of fanfare it can store, so it's a pretty good damage increase. The Constellation 2 makes her generate fanfare stacks much faster on HP loss or healing, so basically it makes it trivial to maximize on the burst damage bonus effects, and also on the overflow fanfare stacks it increases her HP, which increases her damage. So to me it's a game-changing upgrade because it really expands her team situations and her flexibility a lot, and it makes her much more consistent. And in the worst case scenario, so on teams where you have a lot of healing already and you can maximize on fanfare without much issue, it increases her damage by a lot because of the overflow mechanic. So in my opinion it's a game-changing upgrade, mainly because of the first part. Ganyu, the Constellation 1 is basically just more damage and some energy refund, so decent upgrade. The Constellation 2 gives an extra charge to her elemental skill, which is not that useful most of the time in my opinion, so don't. Itto, Constellation 1 is very notorious. It makes her charge attacks not consume stamina when used, which is a big quality of life benefit for her, and also an objective damage increase all the time pretty much. It becomes a smaller damage increase increase, the more skilled you are with jump cancels and stuff like that, but it's a strong upgrade for sure. The Constellation 2 basically makes her deal a little more damage per rotation. It's okay, not a lot of damage really, between decent and okay-ish, probably more like okay-ish to be honest. Ineffa, her Constellation 1 makes the team deal more lunar charge damage, which is a good damage increase for her, but it only becomes a strong upgrade for the team when there is a second lunar charge damage dealer, like Flames. In that case, it becomes a pretty good supportive Constellation as well, so it's a strong upgrade in my opinion. The Constellation 2 makes her deal a lot more damage, it gives her an additional lunar charge hit that is very strong, and it makes her burst give the whole team a shield, so in some rotations, it can be useful, that part, and in general it's a very strong damage increase, so strong upgrade. Itto, the Constellation 1 makes him generate more stacks for his charge attacks. It really is not that much of a damage increase though realistically, even if you fully take advantage of it in your rotation, so it's okay. The Constellation 2, I like it quite a bit more because it makes him recover a lot more energy, and for Itto, energy is a big issue on teams that are not filled with geo units completely, so it's good quality of life, it's a damage increase, for me it's a decent upgrade. Kazuha. His Constellation 1 resets the cooldown of his elemental skill when uses his burst. It's okay, it's in most cases not a team damage increase because using his burst and then using another elemental skill, it's like 4 to 5 seconds of animation time in total, which most teams don't want to have to deal with. So it's like okay, when you need it in terms of grouping and stuff like that, it can be useful, but it's not anything insane. Constellation 2 makes him give the active character elemental mastery when his burst is on the field, basically, which this part again is a problem sometimes because on some teams, some rotations, you don't want to use his burst because other than doing damage, it's not doing much, so it's better to save that time in the rotation. And also, since it's elemental mastery, many of his teams aren't affected by this increase, so it's a decent upgrade, but nothing substantial. It also increases his own elemental mastery, so it makes him give more damage bonus himself, but not a lot more, so yeah. Kinich, pretty straightforward Constellation 1, big damage increase, strong upgrade. Constellation 2, in my opinion, is fantastic. Again, it's a big damage increase, but it also reduces dendro resistance on opponents hit by his cannons, which is a good damage increase for the team if you also have a melee. And it also makes his first cannon deal AoE damage, which is kind of a game-changing upgrade to his kit, in my opinion, but not to the extent to put it in the first tier. I would put him in very good upgrade at the very first of this video. It's just a really good Constellation to me. Klee, the Constellation 1 is more damage, but based on an RNG, which is not great. Okay. Constellation 2 is very interesting because it makes her an elemental skill reduce defense on opponents. This gives her some pretty nice supportive roles on some speedruns specifically because you just need to use the skill, so that's very fast in terms of rotation time. So I would say a decent upgrade. Kokomi, Constellation 1 makes her deal a bit more damage. On the teams where you use Kokomi as a carry, like a triple hydro, stuff like that, it's nice. On other teams, it's not really that important. So I would say overall, it's like an okay-ish upgrade to her kit. Constellation 2 makes her heal more, which on teams like Nilou Bloom can be useful because it gives you more leeway in terms of build. Because you build Kokomi with elemental mastery to make her deal more Bloom damage, but you sacrifice some of her healing that way. So her healing more as a baseline can be pretty nice, and the Nilou teams are some of her best teams, especially with the upcoming Llama, so I would say okay. Lyney, Constellation 1 and Constellation 2 are both decent upgrades to me. They're just really damage increases for his rotations and not much else. Constellation 1 is more front-loaded damage specifically, so that's nice, but really nothing impressive here. Maybe I would put Clorinde's Constellation 1 in strong upgrade because yeah, it's generally a bigger benefit than all of the constellations I'm putting here. So yeah, I'm making this hot fix, like strong upgrade for Clorinde. Mavuika, her Constellation 1 in my opinion is very good because it makes her generate points faster, so kinda like Furina's Constellation 2, and really expands her teams and also gives her an attack percent bonus, which is always useful. In my opinion, it's a very good upgrade because again, it expands teams for a very strong character, and yeah. Constellation 2 is insane, maybe the best Constellation in the game at the moment because it increases her damage output by a lot, and that's very relevant for her teams because on her teams she's like a hyper carry that deals 90% or more of the team damage, so that's very relevant. I think it's a game-changing upgrade. Mualani, the Constellation 1 is very good in my opinion. It increases the damage over first normal attack by a lot, so it's a very good front load damage increase for her, which in a lot of speedruns helps her quite a lot. So in my opinion, very good upgrade. Constellation 2 basically extends her elemental skill duration and makes it easier to get her normal attack stacks at first, which in the worst case scenario a pretty good quality of life benefit for her, and in the best case scenario adds an additional normal attack to her rotations in the case you can maximize it, like against bosses where it's easier to get stacks, and in that case like it really increases her damage by quite a lot. So I don't know, decent or strong upgrade. I would say strong because the quality of life is excellent for a character like Mualani, and it can also add a lot of damage, so yeah, I would say strong upgrade. Nahida, the Constellation 1 basically improves her elemental burst by a bit by activating all the effects that are related to elements present on team by default. It's really not that big of a deal though, so like don't if you just have to pull for a Constellation 1. The Constellation 2 basically increases the damage of all of her teams except burning, because for burning it doesn't do a lot, like for Kinich burning specifically I mean. So I would say since it's still a very good supportive Constellation, I would put it here, but yeah, the fact that she doesn't benefit Kinich really hurts her. Navia, Constellation 1 gives her an energy refund for some reason. I say for some reason because most of her teams she doesn't really need it. It comes in handy sometimes, but yeah, I would say like it's just okay. Constellation 2 gives her crit rate, which is a decent upgrade, decent damage increase overall for her teams and their own damage, so yeah. Nilou, her Constellation 1 extends the duration of her elemental skill ring by 6 seconds, which is quite important because this ring applies Hydro every 2 seconds, and so it's more Hydro application for her Bloom teams, and also increases the damage of her elemental burst, which however is only relevant on Vape teams if you build their burst for it. So I would say, yeah, okay-ish upgrade. The Constellation 2 reduces resistance on opponents to Hydro and Dendro, which is a very consistent damage increase on a team-wide basis, so I would say it's a very good upgrade. Shenhe, her Constellation 1 gives an extra charge to her skill. The skill generates quills for the whole team, and so if you can fully take advantage of this, for example by quick swapping, it translates to a bit more damage, front-loaded also, which is nice for like Ayaka speedruns, stuff like that, and it also of course generates more particles for the team, so on Shenhe composition that's pretty useful. Constellation 2 extends the duration of her burst by 6 seconds, which is pretty nice because the base duration of her burst is of just 12 seconds, which is quite limiting, and also increases the crit damage it gives by 15%, so it's a decent supportive Constellation really. Sigewinne, the most forgotten 5-star in the history of Genshin probably. Her Constellation 1 does quite a lot because it makes the bubble generated by her elemental skill bounce 3 more times, which means more damage for her and more elemental application. That's pretty good, and it also increases the elemental skill buff she provides for the whole team, so that's a nice damage increase on some compositions that have like Furina, Ineffa, stuff like that. Her Constellation 2 makes her give the team a pretty strong shield, which is nice, and also more importantly makes it reduce Hydro resistance on opponents by 35%, which on some composition is a big damage increase. I would say strong upgrade. Skirk, honestly pretty straightforward. Both the Constellation 1 and Constellation 2 make her deal more damage, but I don't think they really change her gameplay significantly, so I think a strong upgrade for both. Varesa, Constellation 1 is a decent damage increase, but nothing insane. The Constellation 2 is very nice because it makes her recover energy every time she uses her plunge attacks, and more energy means more bursts, which can translate to even like 2 or 3 more bursts in a rotation, and that's a big damage increase for her. I would say a strong upgrade because of course energy refunds also mean quality of life, so that's nice. Venti, the Constellation 1 increases his aim shot damage, so yeah. The Constellation 2 makes his skill reduce physical and animal resistance on opponents, but not by a lot, so I would say okay-ish. Maybe he has some uses on some mono-animal teams with that, but Wanderer, his Constellation 1 increases his attack speed and also increases the damage dealt by the darts he creates while dashing, which is a nice damage increase realistically. So I wouldn't say is big enough for me to put it here. The Constellation 2 increases the damage dealt by his burst, but only at the end of his rotation, because it only applies after he fully uses his elemental skill, so that's a minus in my opinion, because I'd like the damage dealt by my burst to be big at the start of the window rather than at the end, but that's just me. I would say decent upgrade. Risely, Constellation 1, there are a lot of things to talk about here, but I want to keep things short, honestly. So, Constellation 1 is a realistic damage increase for his combos, for realistic combos, and is also a quality of life benefit, so I think it's a strong upgrade. Not an essential one, but a strong upgrade. Constellation 2 increases the damage of his burst by a lot, but in the same way as Wanderers, they're basically the same constellations, and it only applies if he uses after his elemental skill. And for Risely, I think it's less effective because generating energy on some of his teams is more of an issue. So I think it's a bit worse, but overall I would say it's a decent upgrade to his kit because it makes his burst pretty strong. Shenhe, Constellation 1 gives an extra charge to her elemental skill, honestly more useful in exploration than anything else. In combat, it's really not needed for her teams. Constellation 2 makes her burst provide more plunge damage support, which is very good. It increases her main team's damage by a lot, and also I think gives her more use cases because it makes her a better plunge support in general, so I will put it here. Xiao, Constellation 1, extra charge to his elemental skill. Sometimes it comes in handy because Xiao is kinda cringe with energy, but on his new teams, the mono animal teams, it's really not that big of a deal, so don't. Constellation 2 also don't. Shenhe, Constellation 1, only really useful for exploration in my opinion, so yeah. Constellation 2 increases her supportive effects by quite a bit depending on the elements she's buffing, because she gives different buffs on this constellation for each element. On some elements it's better than others, but overall I think it's a very good supportive constellation for how flexible and versatile it is. Yae, the Constellation 1 gives her a big energy refund, which on teams where she's played on field, if you have a good battery like Fischl, is really not needed. When she's played off field, her burst is not all that useful, so again not really needed. Overall I would say okay-ish because it's still nice to have. Constellation 2 increases the damage and range of her elemental skill hits, so I would say decent upgrade. Yelan, her Constellation 1 gives an extra charge to her elemental skill, which really comes in handy because Yelan requires a lot of energy to be used, so it's a big upgrade for energy situations, and also on double hydro teams with Furina is a nice particle generation for her as well. It's a good damage increase, I would say decent. Constellation 2 makes her burst deal more hits, which means more damage and more hydro application. Now, the hydro application thing became less useful over time because now not much hydro application is needed for teams to function, even the vape teams, honestly. It was more so meant for Hu Tao back in the day, but now it's whatever. But still, I would say decent. Yumiya, both of her constellations increase her damage, although the Constellation 1 is whatever because it's not even that consistent, and even and then it's a small damage increase. Constellation 2 is a bit better, but nothing insane really. Zhongli, the Constellation 1 increases the limit of the pillars of his elemental skill that can be on field by 1, which makes his elemental skill attacks more consistent, and that can be useful if he's holding the tenacity of the middle set, and yeah, to increase the consistency of that set. Constellation 2 is really not worth it. It makes his burst give a shield, but really not important. Emily, Constellation 1 is a very big damage increase, so even though she's a sub DPS, it makes up for her lesser damage contribution compared to somebody like Kinich. Constellation 2 makes her reduce dendro resistance on opponents basically, so nice supportive constellations for her main teams, so again, Kinich. Honestly though, I would say Yelan's Constellation 2 is similar value to Emily's Constellation 1 for her teams, so I will put it here, yeah. Chiori, her Constellation 1 is very nice because it removes the requirement of having a construct generator on team to increase her elemental skill damage by like 50%. So yeah, that's a very strong upgrade because it just makes her a better sub DPS on an account-wide basis and just expands her team possibilities. Constellation 2 basically makes her deal more damage per rotation when she uses her burst, which is kind of situational because in many cases for energy purposes you don't want to use her burst every rotation, but on some teams you can, like Mono Geo with Itto. I would say it's a decent upgrade. Ayato is Constellations increases damage by a bit, but the Constellation 1 is not that consistent. Constellation 2 is a bit better, but really nothing insane. Right then, Constellation 1 increases resolve stacks generation by a nice amount, but on some teams it's useful, on some teams it's not. Either way, it's just an okay damage increase at most. Constellation 2 increases her damage output by a lot. Now, Raiden on many of your teams now is not a huge damage contributor, so even if it's like a 40% damage increase, it's nothing insane, but she still has some hyper carry uses if you really want, and in those cases of course it's a huge increase to her team usability, so I would say it's a very good upgrade still. Neuvillette, the Constellation 1 gives him an extra stack of his passive by default, so basically allows him to maximize his damage output on double Hydro teams, and also gives him interruption resistance. In my opinion, both of these things were more useful at release than now, because for the second, interruption resistance, he now has several teams with shielders like Citlali and Ineffa that are really strong, some of his best, so he doesn't need the interruption resistance on those. And also there are some teams like the Freeze teams, so double Cryo, double Hydro, where he just gets 1 out of 3 stacks of his first passive, so the one that the Constellation 1 impacts. And in that case, jumping from 1 to 2 is a lesser damage increase than jumping from 2 to 3. So in that case, the Constellation 1 is less effective even as a damage boost. So yeah, I would say before he got to the shielders, specifically in his teams, it was a very good upgrade, but now it's just a strong one in my opinion. The Constellation 2 increases his crit damage. It's a decent damage increase, but nothing special, so I would say yeah, here. Before I end the video, there are some things I want to fix here because I don't like them. Arlecchino C1 to me is a very good upgrade because it's a more consistent damage increase for her than a lot of other constellations in the strong upgrade tier, and also gives her interruption resistance, so that's pretty important in some compositions for her. Fury's Constellation 1 is also a very good upgrade to me because compared to somebody like Emily's Constellation 1, it's definitely more impactful for Chiori than the C1 is for Emily. I want to lower Nilou's Constellation 2 because Llama in her kit basically does the same but a little bit worse, and since resistance reduction effects don't stack too well on top of each other, once Llama joins the team, this Constellation 2 will lose a bit of value. Honestly, Ineffa's C1 and Emily's C2 are too situational as supportive constellations to be strong upgrade on the same level as Furina's Constellation 1 to me, so I think decent upgrade is more fitting for them. Nahida's C1 I see kinda the same as Raiden Guidance one, it can benefit her sometimes, so maybe okay-ish is more fitting. I'll raise Wanderer's Constellation 1 to decent upgrade because it basically makes dodging with him less of a damage loss, and actually in some rotations dodging is beneficial because of the Constellation 1, so it's a damage increase and it can be pretty solid, similar to the Constellation 2 in some scenarios. Kokomi's Constellation 1 is also pretty good because it makes her third normal attack quite a lot stronger and their preferable combo to use, so 3 normal attack spams as opposed to 2 normal attack cancel, 2 normal attack charge attacks that she uses a Constellation 0. The Constellation 2 makes her easier to use and also increases her output, so it's pretty good. And lastly, Klee's C2 strong upgrade, defense reduction, increases the damage of the whole team, kind of similar to Furina's Constellation 1 in that sense, so yeah. And with this, I'm done for today. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe and bye bye.